Okay, I'm going to call the meeting to order at 6:01. Let's begin with roll call. Ms. Stock.
Mrs. Melendi? Here. Mr. Gentry?
Here.
Mr. Drizel? Mr. Guerin? Here. Mr. Troy?
Here.
Mr. Fleck?
Here.
Mr. Quagliano?
Okay, we have a quorum, so with that, we will start with the Pledge of Allegiance. Have Mr. Iddings come up and introduce our guests.
Good evening. We have some friends from Legee Elementary. They're going to introduce themselves before we start the pledge.
Cash, Cravens, Miss O'Brien, 4th grade.
Courtney Galarowski, 2nd grade, Mrs. Salks.
Will Davis, Miss O'Brien, 4th grade.
Hannah Bestman, 5th grade, Miss Goodlow.
Joey, 2nd grade. Second grade.
Let's all rise, please.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, have you guys come on up?
You guys go out on this side. Pick a chair to sit in up there.
Go ahead and have a seat. If the green light is on, that means your microphone's on and you can talk to us, okay? Pick a chair. Somebody can sit over here if you like.
We can share that hammer. Yes. Yes, I can share that hammer. Wait. Hey, do we get to stop it before?
Maybe.
Yeah, you guys can get as close as you want. We weren't up on the side.
Oopsies. Miss Benninger. I saw Miss O'Brien. Miss O'Brien. I said Miss O'Brien. Yeah, that's funny. She's my napping. Yeah. It's okay. Everyone napping. It's okay. The funny. I know. Yeah.
You look really comfortable.
I wonder if we get to eat the snacks. Yeah, I did with some M&Ms and some Ruffles.
I don't know what you're talking about. We don't have any snacks up there. Oh, there we go. Oh, well.
I don't blame you. They look delicious.
We'll see what we can do. Okay. First of all, you guys are the best dressed Pledge of Allegiance group we've had in a long time. So. Okay. Do you guys wear your ties to school every day, or?
I wish.
Oh, really? Okay. Good.
Nope.
Nope. Okay. So, who, if any of you in this group, is a baseball fan? 1, 2. Oh, okay, sort of. You know, there's a game tonight. You aware? Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I want to ask you, how's school going so far this year?
Good. Good.
Good. Okay. And just going down the line from this end to this end, what is your favorite class that you're taking, or what subject is your favorite subject right now? Okay.
Math.
Yeah.
Reading.
Math.
Math? Okay, so a little bit of a mixture of, okay, very good. And what is the most exciting thing that you've done in your class so far? What special project is the most exciting thing you've done? All right, good, none. So,
Running, that's the best subject. Fun run.
okay.
Our science presentation.
Science presentations, very good. Is that like a group project?
Yeah.
What did you put together?
Jupiter.
Jupiter, okay, very good. All right. Okay, well, I want to thank you guys for coming here and leading us in the pledge. And if you want to stick around and see the whole meeting, you certainly can. You're dressed for it, so I appreciate that. Okay? Thanks, guys. Okay.
I want like.
Here, we're going to get a picture with you guys.
Why don't you guys come around this way?
Yeah, we're gonna need them down.
Oh, you're gonna keep
Yeah, no, bring them down. They won't, I don't want to see them. Yep, bring them down in front.
You're gonna come down.
Sorry.
Give me a handful of these. Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah.
You guys, that's cool. Every day. Well, you, Mr. Edding. Yeah. But you're Mr. Edding. That's right.
All right. One more? There we go. Okay, thanks again, guys.
Thank you.
All right, I think I failed to say that this is the committee of the whole for October 12th. The next item on the agenda is public comment. Do we have any public comment today? Yes, we do. Okay, a number of them. And we'll go in order. Mr. David Stone. If you come up, please make sure that the green light is on. You just need to push it, make sure the light's on before you speak. Thank you.
Sorry. The proposal of District 158 middle school softball, girls softball. Just wanted to talk to you a little bit about community support for it. I'm had the privilege and the unique position of coaching Huntley softball for a number of years. I have a 9-year-old and 11-year-old daughter now. I've been with them all the way through the Park District program. Quite frankly, I didn't know that there was a middle school softball even kind of program anywhere in the area. Got a little bit of word that Barrington ran it. That's kind of how we got kind of notified of it. And since then, just had some talks with parents in the area, former coaches, teammates, about the prospect of doing it and the interest in it. And one of the things is also, like I said, I've been in a little bit of a unique position, going up through the kind of the rec program in softball in Huntley, which is a great program. I've also had a little bit of taste of some travel ball, so kind of crossed over between both worlds of girls softball. And one of the things that I've talked to some of the parents about being in the rec situation is that with some of the time commitments, commitments to different sports and others and so forth, there's always kind of and then even the money commitments, there's always kind of a decision if you're ever going to go that kind of travel world in kids sports that I'm starting to be introduced to. I have an 11-year-old daughter. And that was one of the things that I've heard support on both sides. So obviously there's a lot of girls that are very committed to softball, that would be very interested in the program, getting a taste of it going into high school. But also on the rec side, some girls that wouldn't have been typically exposed to a little bit of extra softball. This would give them a little bit of a kind of a footing to give them a chance to possibly play in high school and beyond that, if they're interested, and in a situation where maybe they're committed to another sport or their family just, doesn't have the money for that kind of travel lifestyle. So that was it. I just wanted to give my 2 cents and let you know I support it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay. 2 on the name here, Amy and Mike Smith.
Sorry, I didn't really realize I was having to speak when I came.
Oh, that's-
Hang on. My daughter plays on travel. She's in 7th grade, and her teammate is also here, and we are very much in support for a middle school softball. Even though we have travel, I mean, we would be very interested in having her play on a middle school team and travel if possible. I know actually a girl on the Barrington team who does both. She does the travel and she does the middle school softball. I would say, my daughter's been on the team, this Huntley travel team, for 3 years. The team building that they have is absolutely amazing. I mean, they are all like sisters. If you ask my daughter, she'll tell you these are her best friends. So I think it's great to give other girls the opportunity to have this. All of the girls on her team don't necessarily go to Huntley, but in this case, if it was a middle school team, they would all go to the same school. So I think it would be great, to have a team that these girls could all be on from the same school or even the school district if you have to combine most schools. So just wanted to let you know that my husband and I are in full support, and we have a game, so we have to leave here in about 5 minutes. Otherwise, we would have had our entire team here to also support this. So thanks.
Thank you. Okay. Let's notice a lot of Smiths on the list here. Sean Smith.
Good evening. My name is Sean Smith. I am a resident here in District 158 for about 20 years. I have 2 children in the district, son and a daughter. My daughter is a competitive softball player and has been for about 6 years. I am here tonight to advocate for a middle school softball program in District 158. A little bit about how this started. My daughter plays on a travel team out of Cary, Illinois. She has a teammate that goes to school in Barrington 220. And at the beginning of our season, one of the girls from Barrington said that they were not going to be able to start the season with everyone else because they were playing for their middle school. On the way home, on the car ride home following that meeting with my daughter, she said, "Dad, why can't I play softball in middle school?" Hence, I'm here. So I'm trying to advocate for a middle school program. I've been in contact with both athletic directors at the high school and the middle school, Rita Castens as well as the high school athletic director. I've been in communication with the high school varsity softball coaches. They are in full support of a middle school program. We want to see a middle school program for softball brought to District 158. There is a large contingent of girls softball players within this district. There are 3 primary travel organizations within District 158. Algonquin Aces out of Algonquin, Lake in the Hills Hurricanes out of Lake in the Hills, and then obviously there's a Huntley Red Raiders travel program. Those programs start August 1, so they've already started for the year. I went ahead and did the statistics. Those 3 travel programs have registered 6th graders through 8th graders, 120 girls within this district. So there's a very, very large contingent of girls that are playing softball, not just within a fall or spring season. They play year-round. This is a serious game to them. So there's obviously a need for it. The coaching staff is on board. One of the other things that I think is important to say, we would like to see a program. We are not necessarily asking significant financial resources from the district. Prior, when lacrosse became a sport within District 158, the parents and the players of those parents supported the majority of the cost for the initial startup. That's what I'm asking for here. Those parents that are making that investment in travel softball are making an investment of $1,000 to $2,000 a year for their child. I don't see why a couple $100 to play softball in the middle school would be a problem. So I'm not coming here as a taxpayer looking for money, looking for funds. I'm looking to support a program. I'm starting a campaign. Tonight is the start of the campaign. I want to see middle school softball in the 2018-2019 school year. I'm going to do what it takes to get that job done. I'm here to help. I'm here to communicate. I know that there is going to be an extracurricular meeting on the 26th or 23rd of October. I'm hoping that softball is going to be addressed in that meeting. I want to make sure softball is addressed by that extracurricular committee and our voice is being heard that we've brought here to you tonight. And this will not be our only event. We will be back. We're going to have multiple events to make sure that we keep this topic in the top of your mind when it comes to extracurricular activities for District 158. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Leslie Threadgill-Smith.
Also known as the other half. Going off of what my husband said, my daughter's been in softball since she was, not softball, excuse me, t-ball, then baseball, then softball, since she was 5. And in addition to just the competitive play, the camaraderie, the team building, she's developed relationships for the years that she was in Huntley Little League. She did cross over into travel ball, but we still go and watch the Huntley Little League games and support her friends that she's still friends with, even though she's in travel, and they're in Little League. We still go and support those games and cheer them on. And the thing that I think is the biggest reason why I want softball to come to the middle schools is it's not only a great avenue to going into high school softball, but it shows that whether you're a Huntley Little League player or you're in Lake in the Hills, or you're in Wasco, or you're in Crystal Lake, or you're in Cary, or you're in Huntley, you can all play together on that middle school team because you're all friends on the field and off the field. When you're on the field, it's all about the win, but when you're off the field, it's all about the friendships and the camaraderie and the team building that goes on. And I've seen it with my son who joined wrestling last year, which is also an amazing thing, another extracurricular. I see it with the kids in volleyball and track and just all the different athletics that are offered. And I would love to see the sponge get wet for softball in the district. I just think there's a lot of girls and families that would just embrace it. And I think it would just bring the district even more together extracurricularly by adding softball.
Thank you very much. And we have 2 on this list as well, Christina Smith and is it Savannah Stone? I hope I said that right.
Hi, I'm Christina Smith.
I'm Savannah Stone.
I go to Marlow right now, and I've been doing softball for 6 years, and I would really look forward to playing with my friends at the middle school.
I'm in 5th grade, but I would like to play softball in middle school. I've been playing ever since t-ball.
All my friends are on different teams right now throughout softball, and I think it would be really cool if we could all play together on one team and come together, even though we're on different separate teams. It's always been like a wish for us because we've always been separated. I think that's it.
Okay. Thank you. You did a fine job. Okay. Is there any other public comment? There being none, okay, we'll move on to the next section, which is revision and adoption of the agenda. Going through here, and bear with me because I normally don't do this part. Mr. Drizal does. I do have 2 items that need to come off. As there's no items for closed session, so items 12 and 13 would be removed. Does anybody else have any other revisions? Okay, then I will make a motion to adopt the agenda with the removal of items 12 and 13.
Second.
There's a second from Mr. Gentry, and I think this is a voice vote. So all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, that motion carries. And we move on. And we'll go to number 5, 5.1, the Curriculum Committee with Mr. Guerin.
5.1, the 2017 AP report. Dr. Schlichter.
Thank you. Yes, this is the time of year. Usually in this month, we're able to present last year's AP scores. Now, you've already had some aggregate reporting from our strategic plan. If you recall, we had a target that was tracking total number of students in dual credit and AP because we were really focusing on that college sequence, and so both of those really support that. But we also want to just report for transparency and accountability on our AP scores. So in the packet, it's fairly standard. We've seen it in this format before. I just want to point out that a couple little pieces that look different from prior years. First of all, we do see that our AP numbers themselves are not growing the exact same way they have in past years, and that's because we're adding so many dual credit classes. So our total number of students in AP and dual credit is rising in terms of that college sequence. The actual number of AP students fluctuated a little bit by about 50 students, but we're really seeing that dedication to the college sequence continue with AP and dual credit. I think the other thing that's important to note is that clearly we have multiple students taking multiple AP classes and exams, because you'll notice that the number of students is less than the number of exams, and so we still have our students that are really focusing on that college sequence through AP are continuing to do so. And I also just want to point out, I think it's a really big celebration, is that our percentage of students that are achieving a 3 and above is continuing to go up. It's the highest that it's ever been. And I also am just really, I think, proud of our AP students and teachers at the high school, because a lot of school districts, as you expand AP and expand AP, typically what happens is scores go down because you're no longer restricting access to the classes. And so we've really not seen that happen. We've continued to expand the college readiness sequence with our dual credit and AP, and we've seen our achievement continue to go up as well. So that's, I think, a celebration wanted to present, and we would expect that to continue. So with that, it was just a report for informational purposes, so I'll take any questions.
Any question?
Yeah, on the dual credit comment, is that do you have that number handy in terms of what that increase was? Or do they offset each other, or? They
do offset each other. I don't have it handy. I can get that for you.
Okay.
We've continued to add dual credit classes, and our enrollment and sections have continued to go up. So
Okay.
last year, when we presented our total for 16-17 of just total students enrolled in dual credit and AP, it had gone up substantially by over 100 students since the prior year. And that was in both AP and dual credit combined.
Okay.
I can pull that out, though,
Okay.
and get that to the board just for
Okay.
comparison purposes.
Okay, thank you.
And when our courses do come to you next month for our new courses, you'll see dual credit and AP courses also on that list to continue
Okay.
expanding.
Okay, any other questions? All right. Next section, 5.2. Mr. Is this Dr. Schlichter or Mr. Garrett?
Yep, it's Dr. Schlichter, the proposed International Eastern Europe and Global Summit trip.
Yep. We have actually a little twist that I'm hoping is the first of something that's great to come in future years. If you recall, we did present in I think it might have even been just last month, a new 5-year international travel plan. And one thing that was on there was noted Global Summit, and it was always a TBD location, because we were indicating that really as a part of fleshing out our Global Academy and honestly taking our international travel for students to the next level, we wanted to add in that more organized leadership component. So this is actually the first actual trip we're proposing that's going to be linked to the Global Summit. So this is to Eastern Europe, and in the packet, it's a fairly standard travel package with that Global Summit added in. That's actually a reason, I don't know if anybody noticed, we're bringing this a little early. This is for summer 2019. It's a little bit early, but we really want to get that fundraising going. In addition, the Global Summit slots are limited, so it behooves us to get our process going with approval a little bit earlier to make sure that kids can enroll. And I know that Mrs. Sharkey couldn't be here tonight, but I think Mr. Aney's prepared to answer questions as well if we have anything specific.
I'd just like to make a comment that I had the good fortune to be at one of these global summits a year ago when I was on that trip to Finland. They also took us to The Hague, which is where the summit was in 2016, and I will tell you, I was thoroughly impressed with it. Both the quality of what the kids did and the quality of the kids. I mean, there were thousands of kids there, and it's where I met. Would you mind getting the door, please? Both the quality of the presenters and the quality of the kids, but it's where I had the opportunity to meet both Nelson Mandela's grandson and Mahatma Gandhi's grandsons were there. They spoke. They met with kids, and so I mean the quality of people that they got to meet was incredible, and they got to meet kids from all over the world. It wasn't all just as Mrs. Hoyer says, sit and get. It was there were sessions in an auditorium, but the kids did a lot of breakout sessions where they got to work with kids from other places around the world, and I think it just completely aligns with what we're trying to accomplish in our Global Studies Academy that we are creating. So I applaud. Mr. Aney's worked a lot on international travel. Applaud Ms. Sharkey, who's going to actually do this trip. I think it's a great step forward.
Any other questions?
Okay, and this is to Krakow, Prague, and Munich? Okay, and how long is the trip? 2 weeks. 2 weeks, okay. Very good. Okay, is this...
If there's no other questions, then we'll get approval at the next board meeting.
Yeah, very good.
All right, and then we'll move to 5.3, the SAT report. Dr. Schlichter?
Thank you. This report actually, it's preliminary, and the reason I say it's preliminary is because I wanted a chance for the board to begin thinking about the SAT and looking at our results. We right now are in a situation from the state where the state has not yet set performance levels, so we don't know yet what the state's going to say is meet and exceed. It's not till the end of October or early November that the e-report card is released where we can see our comparison districts. But just because this is such a new test, I didn't want that e-report card to be the first time that we started thinking about these results and seeing them. So this is really truly just informational. I wanted to give everybody a chance to kind of see how this will look in SAT reports and then think about it a little bit. So one way that we internally benchmark, typically we did this for the ACT for years, is we benchmark against ourselves, right? We look at our prior years and we say we're improving this much or we need to improve more based on how we did before. Because this is our baseline year, we don't have that chance, but this is our first go round. The other way that we put scores in context is by externally benchmarking. Usually that means we're looking at how is everybody doing in the state versus us, how's everybody doing nationally, and then specifically our comparison districts. So what I do have here that I was able to show you, I don't have our comparison districts because that's not yet public, but when it becomes public, we'll certainly bring that back to discuss. But we do have the state and national comparisons, which I think are interesting to look at. The other piece that we have, while the state has not yet set its performance levels of what they're saying is meets and exceeds, that's basically where they put a cut score. What we do have is what the College Board says is college readiness. And so what that means essentially for the college readiness benchmarks that they said, ACT had them as well. What that means is that a student who receives that score or above in math or that score or above in reading has a 70% chance of getting a C or better in the relevant college class. So essentially what they're saying is that student's ready to be a college freshman and perform reasonably well in that class. So with that, I just included a few really simple charts. I have our mean score for total, everything combined, and then you'll see it's broken out with the, it's evidence-based reading and writing. We're going to have a whole new set of acronyms now because we've got a new assessment and we love acronyms. But essentially, it's a reading test. Then you'll see the math test. Thank goodness we still call that just math because that makes it easier. And so you'll see our mean score, and again, our first comparisons that we have, we can see that we compare very favorably to the state and to the national scores. I'll be very anxious to look at our comparison districts, though, because I think we all believe those are more relevant, probably in rigorous comparisons. And then the last several charts are actually showing the college readiness benchmarks. And this is something that actually over probably the last 10 or 15 years, I've paid a lot of attention to with the ACT. Because these are very rigorous. And so typically when we see, the paper will start to report students ready for college, things like that. These are students that attain a fairly high benchmark on the test. And again, meaning that they have that higher percentage chance of getting whatever score it is in college. And so when you look at this, you'll see that we have our trajectory of PSAT for 8th grade, PSAT for 9th grade, 10th grade, 11th grade, and then also the SAT. If you recall when we went ahead and approved that PSAT contract, this was really what we were hoping for. because we wanted to be able to start seeing that data trajectory starting in 8th grade so that kids could plan. And just to be really clear, the benchmarks are different in 8th grade than they are in 11th grade. So a student who takes a PSAT in 8th grade, you don't have to reach the same benchmark to be college ready as you would taking the SAT in 11th grade. It's all calibrated. But it's a really good way for individual students to look at their scores and say, this is something I need to work on. Here's a goal area for me. When you look, the actual numbers in the 50s are quite high. And I just want to give you that context because I think some of us might look at that and say, that's not looking so good. On ACT, typically across the state and across the nation, the numbers were in the 40s and sometimes even 30s of students that performed that well on both of the tests. So for us, you'll see there is a difference between our reading and our math in terms of percentage meeting the benchmark. We have those charts at the end. Again, still performing well ahead of state and national. And when we get our comparison districts, hopefully we'll be able to see those metrics as well. And this really is able to give us a way to dive in and try to figure out what our goal areas are for individual kids, for grade levels, and then for moving forward. So I wanted to show you this, but also to give you that context that, again, when you see that comparison to state and national, that's a rigorous comparison. So the fact that we're in the 50s and we've got national in the 30s and state in the 30s, that's real. That jump in that difference is a real difference in rigor for our district. So again, still room for improvement, but we will know a lot more once the state sets its performance benchmarks and also once we see our comparison districts. This was truly just a first glance because I wanted to get us just kind of started thinking about the SAT and what the reporting might look like. Really as a courtesy in any discussion that we want to have now, and then hopefully way more information to come once the state releases all that information. So with that, any questions I'm happy to entertain.
When do you expect the state to release those numbers?
Well, typically the e-report card, which is where it comes through, is released in late October. Last year it was delayed at least 2 weeks into November. We've been frantically approving, like they keep sending us emails saying, please approve this data, please. And that's the one that has all the data. It has attendance data. It has just tons and tons and tons of data on it. So I think probably late October, which really is what spurred me to do this here, because I wanted us to start kind of getting our head in that game together before we just all of a sudden got blasted with the big e-report card online. Again, it's hard, and again, just don't quote me on that because it'll all depend on when they when they get their act together to release it. But typically late October, early November.
The chart you have on the meeting both benchmarks is, does that look very similar to ACT data?
It does look similar to ACT data. This is actually a little bit higher than what our ACT was. So the mean, they have concordance tables is what they call them between SAT and ACT when you're looking at your mean score. I did not put that in here, and the reason I did not is because most of the statisticians that work for the largest Chicago area districts have really debunked that they don't have much meaning. They are not confident in that stats analysis, and so to be honest, I didn't want us as a district to get too worked up in that comparison until we start seeing our comparison districts. But in terms of meeting the college readiness benchmark, absolutely, I think this looks a little stronger than our ACT ever did, but ACT typically was brought down by the science section for every district in the entire country. The science portion, typically way fewer students met that benchmark than anywhere else, like across the nation in the 20s, usually 20%-ish. So I think that's probably why this one looks a little bit higher. One last piece I would say on this is just to kind of give you some context of why we look at the mean and also percent meeting the benchmark. If we just look at the mean, it's an average. And so if we say we want to raise our average, we could do that in a lot of different ways, right? We could just focus on our highest kids and bring them higher. We could focus on our lowest kids and bring them a little bit higher, and all that would raise our average. But if we don't also look at this distribution of what percentage met a benchmark, I think some kids can get left behind. So it's really important for us to kind of look at both of these metrics. I think for accountability, my anticipation is we'll probably still continue to use the mean because that's typically what's reported publicly. But I wanted for us to be looking at this data together as well. I think it's real important for our student achievement.
In looking at that same graph, is there anything that can be glean, and I'm just trying to do like.
Which one are you looking at?
The meeting both benchmarks. And I'm just doing the comparative of the indexes across each of the 8, 9, 10, 11.
Yep.
And it feels like we're highest in the 8 and then highest in the 12. Is there any, I guess, are they just not technically comparable, or is there anything that can be gleaned
Typically, even on the ACT sequence, if you recall, was Explore, Plan, and ACT. Typically, more students met the benchmark on Explore than they did on ACT. It was more typical in 8th grade, largely due to the fact that the benchmarks were so much lower, and because if you think about an 8th grader, the benchmark is set so there's a little bit of wiggle room, because we're certainly not saying that if you miss this benchmark in 8th grade, you're doomed. It's just a matter of saying our projection would be that we have some work to do. Actually, what I see when I look at this is it's very interesting to me that the SAT, really the culmination, is so high, because typically when you look at a trajectory,
the strongest column of them.
and that's actually a little bit unusual from my experience with the ACT, is that typically it just goes down slightly as we go along because the benchmarks become more rigorous. So again, preliminary till we see our comparison districts, but I'm actually really encouraged by this. Because I'm seeing that our 11th grade students on that SAT are even having a little stronger performance than our 10th and 11th graders did earlier in their career with the different benchmarks. Again, I'll know more a little bit, probably end of October, maybe for November, we can discuss if that comes out, but I'm encouraged by this.
Okay.
Any other questions, comments? All right, thank you. And then we will go to 5.4, the elementary literacy report. Dr. Schlichter.
Thank you.
Could I introduce? Just want to tell the board one of the big reasons why we're doing this. The board had some questions for me, kind of about what we've been working on in literacy in the last couple of years, and we don't spend a lot of time at board meetings going into a lot of the detail of the curriculum work, but there's been a lot going on, and we're trying to really dive in and continually improve the literacy area, because we're very cognizant and firmly believe it's the bedrock of everything we do in this district. And if we don't do well in elementary literacy, we're not going to do well at anything else. So I just wanted to take an opportunity to really kind of give you a comprehensive overview of what's been going on. So that's what you're going to see.
Absolutely. So like Dr. Berkey said, part of this is going to be background. I think some new board members, and the rest of us kind of lived through some of the transitions, but it's also easy to kind of forget. So I've been with this transition for 4 years of where we've been, but we even started quite a bit before I came as well in some of the ways we were approaching literacy. So we want to take a little bit of time travel, do some background, also provide some data from the most recent review. What you're going to see is actually probably a little bit more data in the form of charts than we normally present to the board. Probably a little bit more technical data as well, but I think it's important to understand because that's really what's driven us to how we're going to focus. And then also just discuss a little bit about how our plans for the future are going to meet what we see as the future needs. So again, just a little bit of background. So prior to this most recent literacy review that we did last year, the literacy area was reviewed in 2011. That's a typical cycle. It's about a 5 or 6 year review cycle. At that time, the most important identified needs for the district were building consistency across, and I'm talking elementary now, across the buildings. We had grown extremely fast in the district, and typically when a district grows that fast, for something as technical as elementary literacy, it's really important to have a consistent program across buildings, and it's also really hard to maintain that when you're growing so quickly. So we identified consistency. And we also wanted to implement the one-to-one initiative via literacy. We firmly believe that our students needed to be 21st century citizens and be able to use technology for learning, and so the literacy implementation was a vehicle for that. So at that time, you started hearing a lot about one-to-one. You heard about Kunos, which we shifted to Chromebooks, which we received a lot of thanks for, as you recall that journey. And you also heard a lot about Reading Street, which was a basal system that was truly designed to build consistency across all of our elementary experience. We adopted Reading Street knowing that we would absolutely be able to build consistency. We also adopted it knowing that no one system does everything, but we had identified consistency as that most important goal. And the truth is that our approach with one-to-one and with Reading Street did both of those things. So when we initiated the review in 2016, we expected that we would find a consistent program across our buildings, and we absolutely found that. We also expected that we might find a few areas of, I don't want to call it deficit, but need, that perhaps were not the biggest focus in Reading Street. Once we developed that consistency, we went back and said, okay, what's our biggest area of focus that needs to happen to move learning forward? So during the review, we analyzed performance data. We also took a lot of anecdotal data from teachers, which is essentially their impressions from their classrooms. And I'm going to say it all lined up absolutely perfectly. The areas of need that teachers identified and also that our data bore out, which I'll show you in just a few minutes, vocabulary acquisition, phonics, and word reading fluency. So those are very, very foundational elements of elementary literacy and building reading capacity for students. We analyzed MAP goal areas, so in other words, the reading sub-areas for MAP, as well as RTI data, and also Ames Web reading data. That's our benchmarking. So what I'm going to do is to show you some of that data. Again, it's a little bit more detailed and technical than what we typically get into at a board meeting, but I think it's good for us all to have kind of that same viewpoint to see where we were. So when we look at the percent of students making their projected MAP growth in reading, what we actually saw from 14-15, which is when the entire district was 1-to-1 with Reading Street at every building, and then 15-16, 16-17, is we saw a slight decline in students making expected MAP growth. And so that told us, this was in the review last year, that told us we needed to drill down into reading to say, okay, what area is it? Like, what is it that's causing that? Because what we knew is that it couldn't be every area. It was going to be something specific. When we looked at our areas of strength, so in other words, from our MAP results, what areas emerged as extremely strong for our students? The highest area in 15-16 was foundational skills for kindergarten and first grade, absolutely appropriate, and then reading literature, so reading fiction, essentially, as well, for grades 2-5. The highest areas that we had the greatest strength for 16-17, foundational skills, absolutely expected and appropriate for kindergarten and first grade. Something that's actually a really good thing is that you see informational text is starting to appear. That is a direct relation to the implementation of the new standards, because we do have informational text as well as literature as a focus there. And honestly, we all probably know just from our own lives that reading and understanding informational text is oftentimes a lot harder than reading and understanding fiction. So that's a great improvement in performance for our students. The data from MAP reading that showed our areas of need. So in other words, our areas that we performed in a lower manner on, that we said, okay, these were the highest, what were our areas that we really need to focus on? And this is really what started pointing us in the direction. If you see vocabulary and acquisition and use, or vocabulary use and functions, across the board what we're seeing is that need for vocabulary. And when we drill down on that, it relates to a need for phonics. It relates to a need for that foundational reading skill. One thing that I would say is that it's not that unusual for an area of need in vocabulary to be at the lower grades. It is a little bit unusual. It kind of caught our attention that continues to be the greatest area of need at the upper grades. And so again, that reaffirmed our need to engage in very specific instruction and curriculum in that area. And what that area is called as a general instructional practice is word study. So you'll hear us saying word study. That was a result of the review, is we're going to start in year one, that's this year, with word study. And that's why, is because we really saw that need for vocabulary acquisition. So when we looked specifically at some of the results for MAP reading and vocabulary, we did identify, again, so drilling down one more level, we did identify that over the course of those years that we had been really working on building consistency, that we do have a need, that there was a slight decline in students meeting their goals or their projected growth in that area of vocabulary. So again, confirming that if we're going to go in a direction to really focus strongly for elementary literacy instruction, that word study should be the way that we go. And then the second area that we look at, I'll probably just need to explain a little bit. Another piece that gives us a lot of data is that we look at our RTI process. So we have a structure for identifying students for intervention, and what can tell us a lot is what areas are we identifying students in. So it would be very expected that for a kindergartner, first grader, that we'd be identifying phonemic awareness, phonics, some of those very basic areas. Other areas that we look at identification, fluency, vocabulary, comprehension. So sometimes a red flag for us that can really draw our attention is there a bunch of students being identified for a specific type of intervention in a grade level that's not expected? So we would typically expect that our 3rd through 5th graders would have more comprehension interventions and not need as many vocabulary or phonics interventions. So when we look at that spread, we want to see sort of this predictable area of how students gain their reading skills. So when we look at this, this is 15-16, the percentage of students who were receiving intervention is really showing a lot of students needing phonics. And so you'll see that red is the phonics, and that's that line that's kind of going down. And I just want to explain this for a moment. So very, very acceptable and appropriate that our kindergartners and our first graders would need phonics looking exactly like it does. However, we would expect the trajectory of that red line to slope very sharply down to 0, so that really close to 0, so that by 3rd grade it would be lower than it is, and by 4th and 5th it would be practically nothing. So in other words, by 4th and 5th we should be just working on comprehension and not need that phonics intervention anymore. So what that indicated to us, if we have more students than expected for a grade level needing a phonics intervention, says, okay, maybe it's not an intervention issue. We have to go back and look at our overall curriculum and say what's missing from it so that we can really get the Tier 1 core instruction in that area, because we shouldn't need that many interventions. So really, again, that was just an explanation of what I said. It's expected that the highest percentage of interventions in first grade is phonics and kindergarten is phonics. It's not expected for those later grades. And so that really caused us to focus. Move that down. So by spring of 2017, so this is now the end of last year. So 15-16, we were looking at the data in the review from the prior year, and we really saw that need. By the end of last year, we are seeing the phonics need go down in 4th and 5th. So looking at that red line, that trajectory is looking a little bit more like we would expect it to, but again, we would still expect it to be even lower. Fluency is also a function of phonics. So the fact that those red and yellow lines are still sort of stubbornly maintaining a little bit higher than we would want to see them in 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade really just indicate that when we look at areas of need for those upper elementary students, we're just seeing that need for more foundation in phonics and in vocabulary and in fluency at the lower grades, so that when they get to 3rd, 4th, and 5th, comprehension is the area that can be focused on. This is one we put in mostly because it's an important benchmarking tool we use. It's not a very exciting chart. But again, it's showing, if we look at kindergarten and first, and we look at students in 16-17, that students meeting and exceeding their grade level standards in that area for word reading fluency is at about 60%. And so again, that's an area that we need to be higher. So we need to focus, especially in kinder, first, and second, on that foundational area of word study, on fluency, on phonics. And I also just want to take a minute to say right now, this isn't like stop the presses, super concerned, really, really horrible, because clearly our results still are very, very solid. And certainly our PARCC scores actually continue to go up at those upper levels. But what we want to do is make sure we keep getting better, and the way to do it is to be a little more surgical like this, to drill down and to say, okay, where's the let's just look it in the face and say, if there's a few pieces that we have to be real honest about and say, what's our area of need? Well, that's it. So what we've decided to do is to focus on word study. I wanted to also just make a little bit of a comment about one-to-one, because I think that that's something that's also in our minds. When we went one-to-one in our district, we flat out said, we never said, we're doing this to raise scores. That's not the reason we did it. We obviously did it expecting it would continue to support improved achievement. But we did it to help students master that creativity, collaboration, really the 21st century skills going forward. And we really have moved forward in those goal areas. We visit classrooms and we see students being able to learn more independently. We see students learning in a more personalized way. So in many ways, that one-to-one initiative has met those goals. We just want to make sure that we continue to use that technology to support the area of greatest need in word study. So basically, what all that data told...
If I can interrupt you and add a comment in about that. On one-to-one, the one thing I would say is, we definitely hope that in the long run, the use of one-to-one, when we completely implement it in a personalized learning structure, does increase student achievement. I mean, that is part of what we're looking for. Never were we looking for any type of quick fix, but something sustainable over the long run. And I think that one of the real reasons that we are really not shifting focus, but continuing focus to look hard at doing more with personalized learning is very much tied to where one-to-one has gotten us, because I really think it's provided a really good foundation, and it has allowed for a lot of change in our district, but it is by itself, it is still a foundation, and so it really needs to be built upon. And so just looking at this one slide on one-to-one, what I'd really like to stress to the board is this is really a long-term activity where I'm really happy we were out of the gate early on one-to-one, because the conversations we're having now about personalized learning, we couldn't be having if we hadn't built that foundation the way we did. And many districts are still working on laying that foundation. So everything you talked about with 21st century skills and collaboration, more ownership over learning, I think one-to-one has definitely helped that, but I think it's a journey that we really are still only on the beginning ends of. So
I think that actually, to piggyback on that, something that we've really seen is that any district, when they first go one-to-one, especially in the primary grades, in fact, a lot of districts look at us and say, we don't even know how you are one-to-one in kindergarten. They can't even figure out how to do it. Our kindergarten teachers from Leahy actually went and presented at a conference last year, and they were just really presenting ways to integrate one-to-one, technology tools to help kindergartners learn literacy and learn in different ways. And their session was so big, it was over 50 people, they had to move the room. And then they did it twice because people were just flocking to us to say, how do you do this with younger students? And I think one huge benefit for us is that we've gotten that out of the way by now. So we figured that part out. Now it's just a matter of refinement and making sure that we see that improvement. Just wanted to mention that because I think that that's been a huge part of our learning landscape as well. So the results of the review, really with that data pointing us in the direction, was that word study was our strongest area of need and that we decided to implement that in year one. So that's this year, which is underway. Our second area of focus then is going to be reading workshop, which will continue to focus on the comprehension end. Ideally, that word study will take care of those foundational pieces. So we'll add the layer of reading workshop next year. Then the third year is writing workshop. And obviously reading and writing and foundational skills are all very closely related, but the instructional pieces that specifically need to have for teachers to be provided PD are a little bit distinct. And so we wanted to be very intentional about how we did that. So we have a definition of word study. This is really taking us away from spelling tests. And so this is something that's a little bit of a shift. So your typical prior sort of what I did when I was in school, memorization of words, it's really a shift to a focus on patterns and meaning. To get students more fluent, it says here to improve automaticity, it means to be more quick, so being able to recognize a pattern in a word. Again, to be a little bit more technical than what we typically are, these are the components of word study. And again, when you look at the terms, that's fine. When you look at the definitions, it makes sense to say that if we're going to study patterns of words, these are the components. And then word study, when you look at it happening, does not necessarily look exciting always. Word study looks like small group instruction. Sometimes there will be an online component. Sometimes it will be using paper like this teacher is. It will be a teacher going over word patterns with students, asking students to sort based on word sounds and blends and word patterns that they see. And that sort of work is what builds their fluency and builds that foundational skill. As we go along through this year, the way that we're going to measure progress is based on some of those same metrics that you saw that we identified the need in the first place. So we'll be looking at MAP, we'll be looking at our RTI data, we'll be looking at AimsWeb. We'll also be looking at PARC. I will tell you, PARC will not measure fluency or phonics for us. PARC will measure comprehension, and then we just have to use our other metrics to kind of dig down a little bit deeper. But it is a great source because we can certainly compare to other districts on that. And then our expected results are that those sub-goal areas would improve, the ones that we saw for vocabulary use and acquisition and for fluency, and that we would see a reduction of students in grades 3 through 5 identified for phonics interventions. So those are the metrics that we will be internally monitoring. And then, of course, we do have our strategic plan measures, and those are very specifically targeted to fluency in first and second grade, because what we know is that increasing that fluency in first and second grade is what's going to cause us to not have to focus on it in third, fourth, and fifth grade. So that data picture for elementary literacy for the district, I think, really supports our focus for the year. And then as we go along, we'll be monitoring our data and happy to come back and share as well, benchmarking along the way about how we're doing, and certainly reporting out at the end of the year with those strategic plan goals. So again, a lot of information and probably a little more technical on the data side than what we typically do, but I thought it might be useful for us just to understand that picture together and kind of be able to think through, here's why we are where we are and why we chose to focus where we're focusing for this year. So with that, I will take any questions anyone has.
They don't know I'm going to do this, but could I ask our 3 K2 principals to come up, please? That would be you, Mrs. Hoyu, and Dr. Zayas, Mr. Iddings. Not to name names. Right. Curtain number 1. So, because I really want to make sure we hear a principal perspective too, because this is a huge part of their job. Being a K2 principal, a huge part of what they do is working with teachers, working with their buildings on elementary literacy. And I would agree, with what Dr. Schlichter said. I think we're doing a good job, but I think we're not a district that even publicly, which is very public. I mean, we're not gonna come out and say we're doing the best job we possibly can, because I think we can always be better, and that's why I think this continual improvement process is really important. What I'd like to ask the 3 of you is, I know this is something, the things in here are all things that you're working on, but what is it we can do to go to the next level when it comes to literacy in the next, say, 5 years? And I know the things in here. I mean, I know we're all on the same page on that, but what else from a perspective of knowing that we're doing really well, but we can do better?
One of the most important things that we can do, obviously, with the programs we're implementing right now with Jolly Phonics and Words Their Way and digging into what word study is, it's very important. But the staff members having the time to work together, to plan these units out, to compare student progress, to see what's working in the classroom, what isn't working, how we can move forward is going to be very important in the future. And that's finding that time for those teachers to have that collaboration to build that.
Yeah, and I would echo that, because I completely agree, and I would echo that for the board. The board has heard some of the discussion, obviously, about how Mrs. Hoyu's been leading the committee that's looking at how we get more collaboration time in elementary school, and I think that it is very important for all of us to recognize that teachers, they do need more time to be able to work on staff development when it comes to literacy, but also on collaboration. So I think that's a great point.
So I think something happened in between when we started with Reading Street and then where we are at right now, and that was the Common Core standards. So the Common Core standards came through. They are much more rigorous than our old Illinois standards, and Reading Street really was kind of built on Illinois standards, and then some Common Core stuff was shoved in there, and then they called it the Common Core version of Reading Street. So I actually think those graphs of what MAP test is showing us is that we don't have our students thinking deeply enough here yet. And so I think given some collaboration time around our standards, the standards are rigorous. So it's like we've got to get kids thinking and exposed to rigorous text in order to think about nonfiction text, fiction text, compare and contrast. And for a K1 and 2, those are really hard skills. I mean, for 3, 4, and 5, they're hard. K1 and 2, we've got to start building that foundation for them to think deeper so that when they get to MAP tests and they get on to PARC tests, when they're asking them to do those complex tasks, that they're ready to do that. So that's how I'd like to use that collaboration time. Whenever we get our teachers together, it's around those Common Core standards. Jen?
There's a lot on the list, but I think another thing too that we've talked a lot about is looking into the future and things is not only it's integrating that social studies and science into literacy and how do we integrate other subjects in there. And as they said too with that collaboration piece is the professional development for teachers. We have a lot of teachers and staff members that have been here for a long time and really giving that professional development, how things have evolved and changed throughout the years and how do we change our instruction, how do we change our teaching. So professional development is something really that we need to look at.
So could I ask, since you're there, Dr. Zayas, you can get this question. So when an early elementary student, a kindergartner, first grader, is really struggling with any of the components that we went over earlier in this in literacy, what are the underlying reasons? And how what are those reasons that some kids struggle? The predominant reasons, I guess.
I guess there's multiple reasons. You have demographic reasons, you have family, you have home, you have also the student depending. So those are the questions that teachers always have when we have like our data meetings and things like what are those underlining. Sometimes it's exposure to literacy. Sometimes, especially in kindergarten, it's all exposure. How much are they being read to at home? How much reading have they been listening to? Text, storytelling, those type of things. Second grade, it gets to. Has teachers have the PD? Have we incorporated those type of things? I don't know. Do you want to?
Do kids come in? Do kids come into kindergarten at wildly different levels? Or
Yes.
is that okay?
Yes, I would say.
Okay, so
Would you agree?
so we're getting them at different levels, and I assume then we obviously have to. That may be the cause for some of the interventions that have to happen early on to try to get all kids up. And so, again, I'm far from a literacy expert, but I think that obviously we all know that reading in the home is really important. And
Reading
I
at
think
home is important. I know we've noticed a big trend too. I mean, we're a different generation now, so students are coming in with different knowledge skills. So they're coming really technology based, very good on tablets and very good on the Chromebooks and things, but they haven't had exposure to authentic literacy, reading, just being read to. Those type of things are what kindergarten teachers are coming pretty high, but then they're lacking maybe social skills or other type of skills that other students have.
We're all taking a kids assessment right
Yes,
now.
we are.
Our kindergarten teachers are assessing how their students come in from various preschool programs and kids that haven't had any exposure to preschool programs. And we're submitting all that data to the state too.
And is there a huge difference with kids that have been in preschool programs?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Just having school readiness skills.
Right.
Yep.
Right. Okay. All right. Why don't you stay there for a second, and board, do you have any questions?
Just on that last point about, I guess to kind of paraphrase what you said, it's almost like they're coming in more tech savvy, less personable savvy. Is that kind of a symptom of the kind of a cultural shift as well, or is there more to that?
You're coming from even younger kids now, even they have Fisher-Price has something where you could put your phone on and it's a toy for 1-year-olds. I mean, they have toys now that they have, they're smart, everything is smart, savvy and all this kind of stuff. So the technology piece, they're the easiest, even like incorporating the Chromebooks with them, and where they have a hard time is mouse, because they don't know how to use a mouse because they're not used to that. But other than that, yes. They are very tech savvy.
So the mouse is ancient technology now? Is it? Okay.
Pretty much.
A mouse is ancient.
In our college and career readiness readings and research that we've done here at the district level, they're tracing back to the K2 level social emotional readiness and on level reading at grade 3. Those are the best predictors for future success. And so if K2 did just that and got kids ready for 3rd grade at grade level reading, and they were ready to work collaboratively, think as in a team, those kinds of skills are hard to come by these days. So we're trying really hard every week to, and our teachers are too, to expose young students to collaborative conversations, problem solving, and those are things that I think are a product of the culture that we're not asking kids to do as often out at a playground or at the parks when they're so little. And so then we come in with that deficit, so we're trying to fill that. Just the deficits change, right, with the culture.
Right.
It's interesting.
So does the one-to-one reinforce the deficit?
Well, I think the purpose of one-to-one, like I don't think we have Chromebooks to teach kids how to use Chromebooks.
Yeah.
We have Chromebooks to expose them to different kinds of text or different kinds of experiences. So I think as long as the purpose for our technology is to think or have exposure to different things, then I think that's a better purpose than just how do you use this Chromebook, how do you turn it on, how do you turn it off. They're coming in with that knowledge.
Right.
And I think
our staff members are very cognizant of that need to have them use these as tools, but it doesn't dominate the day. It's
They still need books in their hands.
Yeah. Oh no,
and that's really
absolutely.
what
And I
we've
think,
seen, yep.
Yeah,
But
and
I'm sorry. You were saying they come in with the tech savvy.
They do.
So that's not an issue. It's the other stuff that's the issue. So we're giving them the technology, which reinforces what they already have, but it does it help
But
their
if they
deficits?
put the right things on the technology
Yeah.
versus different things, so we do incorporate those tools or literacy, or we even did like some things they get, like students were getting these Time for Kids and Scholastic News, and we were using those for nonfiction and things in the classrooms, and then we realized, well, that's kind of late news, because by the time they got it, they were talking about Hurricane Harvey. Well, Maria happened. So we were already on to 2 other hurricanes, and now online, when we're talking about real text, they have it right there of what happened. So it's incorporating it, but with real purpose.
And I think
purposeful.
it's also, I think, important to say that it's a tool for the teacher as well. So, back when we were all in school, I mean, teachers tried their best to give each student what they needed, but when you have a full class of students, even just figuring out what they need, much less actually providing differentiated instruction. When I was a young teacher, we talked about it all the time, and no one was ever able to give me a tool to help me do it. And I think it's important to note technology in that way too. So it's not just the tech savviness of the students, but it's how we're using it to start personalizing it for kids. And that's been a huge jump forward with having those devices in the hands of kids. I can even compare to other districts right now that don't have devices in the hands of every student, and they're just in some ways really hamstrung in their ability compared to what we're able to do in that way too. So it's really that use.
Okay. But one example of where I think it's been very beneficial is Myond. And that's something that Mrs. Hoyu brought to the district, and it's been expanded to other buildings. But Myond is a program where students can select text, and it's all based on what their level is. It pushes them higher and higher as they read, and it's very interactive. But one of the things I really like about it, and I think kids like about it, is a lot of the text are interest based. So they're able to read things that they're interested in, where when you have hard copies of leveled books, they can't always find something they want. And I think a lot of reading instruction at that level is learning to love to read, because then they're going to do it on their own. And if we can get them to love to read, I think that's one of the big accomplishments of early elementary. So Myond is an example of something that we've been able to do with literacy that we could not have done without technology. The last thing I'd say on that is, I'm the biggest one-to-one person there is, but we have to do what makes sense and what works. And there are many situations in early elementary where, like some of our principals said, it makes sense to use books. And that's okay, because we don't want kids on one-to-one just because we have it, and we're going to be on it all day long. We have to do what's best for kids, and being on that all day long isn't what's best for kids. And so I think we do give our teachers and definitely our buildings a lot of latitude with that, where they're using technology appropriately, but we're not over forcing it. So.
And then I'm going to have several of them jotted down, and I'm going to spray it all fields or all people here. Dr. Burke, you used the phrase "go to the next level." So the question for me was, what is the next level? Is it just reducing some of these numbers so that these percentages do go down to zero, or is there more in a different layer that we haven't gotten to yet? What is the next level?
No, I think for us, one metric of the next level is what we talked about with the strategic plan targets that we're starting to embark on: personalized learning. So how do we personalize literacy instruction for students? That's the end goal, 5-year, 6-year, next level, perfect world. So starting to embark on that for us means implementing this balanced literacy framework. So word study, reading workshop, writer's workshop, because that's going to be the small group. You saw that teacher working with those 3 students. That small group instruction, really focusing on knowing the learner. I think that's another piece that we've heard a lot talking at K2 this year is, how can we help teachers have the tools to really know their learners in that room, and then to know what they need. So for us, the next level, when we say it's personalized learning, that sounds a little flashy, but when we dial it back to say what happens next, it is truly just taking these deep steps to balance literacy while truly knowing our learners and what they need. You guys might have a different answer too, so feel free to chime in.
No, I think it's about getting to know our learners, but the harder part of this is getting to know our thinkers. So how are we getting, right, 5, 6, and how are we getting to know how they think, and then how they collaborate around problem solving? Reading and writing workshop can get us there, but we've got to start with getting to know our learners and thinkers now, and then how do we get them to collaborate around a problem to solve? Those are really hard.
I think one of my beliefs, Mr. Troy, is I believe we have too many kids in interventions. I think that as we go to the next level, I think we need to, there will always be some kids that need intervention. By that I mean somebody who needs, we call it tier 1, but somebody who needs extra help outside of the regular classroom. We know that some kids are going to need that. But we have a lot of kids getting different types of interventions, which I think tells us that there can be more that we can do within the tier 1 setting. And I think that's one of our next levels that we're really working on. And that's, again, back to what the goal of word study is to help kids on those skills in the regular classroom setting.
Okay, and then on that picture where we had the teacher with the 3 kids, from a classroom management standpoint, how is that thrown off? To me, when we have a number of 20 or 22 kids in a classroom.
The question is, what's everyone else doing?
Yeah.
Swinging from the rafters.
Well, because I was a substitute several years ago, and so I've had to deal with that kind of a scenario. Mm-hmm. And I'll tell you, I didn't have the training for it. But when I sat in that classroom and I had 3 kids in front of me, I had it seemed like 3 minutes in the blink of an eye. And it was time to get the next group over. And yet you look at the watch and it's 10 minutes, and yet that 10 minutes just isn't enough. And that's one group of 3 kids.
Right.
And so now you have, 7 other groups around, assuming it's a classroom of 21, let's just make it easy. But now you've got 7 other groups that are going. And yes, is there an independent group? Yes, there's beanbags in this corner, and there's something else in this corner, and different ways to keep their interest for that block of time before they rotate around. But is there still enough people in the classroom to do what needs to be done to give the kids that directed attention as opposed to self-directed?
Aren't our teachers amazing?
The teachers do a great job.
Yes, they
It'd be
are.
amazing.
Yes, they are.
That's a lot of classroom
it's-
management and
absolutely.
teaching them.
And to go even beyond that question, from the professional development standpoint, do they have the skills across the board to do that classroom management? Because it's not just the technical skills, it's not the reading street or the word study skills, it's the classroom management skills. And wanting to make sure that that is part of the professional
And
development.
a lot of that is what takes place at the beginning of the school year.
Okay.
A lot of practice and processes and procedures, and getting the students into those routines of what they're doing at a given time, what the expectations are from the teacher, teacher having that organized so that they have everything laid out where the students can access what they need to get to in order to do meaningful work in a small group setting while the teachers engage with other students.
It's hard.
It's hard.
Yeah.
Right.
I was just a one-day person,
Right.
you know.
And I would encourage, and I'm sure you guys are too, encourage, come on in and see
Yeah.
what they're doing in these classrooms. Every time I go into the classroom, I think back to my days of teaching and like, wow, it's come a long way because it's pretty good stuff.
Yeah.
Any other questions, comments?
Just a question on kind of the output of and direction of this study and then the strategic plan goals. It feels like they're aligned, but is there anything that the alignment would need to be refined in terms of things added or?
That's a great question. I think for this year, they're actually very well aligned, very tightly, because we've got our overall K-8 goals that we're using, just like we always have with our growth model. And then we've got those real specific reading fluency goals, which are just truly surgically speaking to first and second grade that we know need this area. I do think that that's something that if we want to continue sort of keeping that level of specificity, that we want to keep looking at our data and saying, okay, area of need, and then if we want that reflected in strategic plan, we'll have to maybe be a little flexible on what those look like for the next year.
Is
Because
your feeling that if this chartered path in the next year is successful, those strategic plan goals will be achieved?
Yes, for that particular component. Not to say we won't keep improving, but to say the purpose of a strategic plan goal is to keep that big picture focus. And then we would say, okay, now our next area is in our next area and our next area. So that would be my expectation and my hope.
Okay. And then I had one other question that's a little bit more backward looking, but listening to the answers here, I think I know what the answer will be. But it seems like the challenge historically was, hey, with growth and keeping the consistency in across all buildings, grades, that type of thing, what threatens the consistency today and what's the biggest concern there?
I can start and you guys can jump in if you want. So in a balanced literacy system like what we're implementing, which really is acknowledged best practice across the industry, other districts our size and larger and smaller do it, there are more movable pieces than there are in a basal system like Reading Street. So if you think way back when you had the basals that were in textbooks and the teacher kind of walked them through, at every grade level, it's now online, it's Reading Street. So I think when you say the biggest threat to that or the biggest challenge is that as we shift to a balanced literacy system where teachers are doing what we see up there on the screen, it is not rote learning. It is not step-by-step follow this script. So that's where that professional development to me comes in. I think it's also the level of collaboration that we have between our principals. Because these guys meet every 2 weeks. We have RTI facilitators that join them occasionally, and really keeping a close eye on our data across the buildings. Because what we want to see is, honestly, what we want to see is that our data is comparable, right? Because that's going to be the ultimate measure, but also what you observe in classrooms. So as we go into classrooms, if we see wildly different instructional practices across buildings, that would be a huge red flag. The system that we're looking at putting in place is best practice system. It is a challenge to keep it consistent, which I think is probably why 5 years ago it wouldn't have been the best choice, because it just would have been so difficult to do that lift at that time. We have the consistency. Now this is kind of our next jumping off point.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Going back to your question and bringing it back, it goes back to how we answered at the beginning. So pretty much the challenges and threats are collaboration, the teachers knowing the standards, and teachers will always say time. So when do I have the time to plan for all of this or the time to do that? So it goes back to where we started from: time, collaboration, and PD. That's kind of.
Even that vertical collaboration between grade levels too, knowing what the grade level ahead of you is doing, what the grade level behind you did.
And teachers across buildings as well. We
across
keep hearing that for Institute Days to say, how can I get with the rest of the second grade teachers across the district?
Right, okay. Those were my predicted answers. And I did have to Google in prepping for this automaticity, so I'm going to use that now as much as I can.
I still have some more. On the map score slide, do you look at the matriculation between the grades? Like the kindergarten in 15, how did they pan out in 2016 as first graders and then in 17 as second graders? Because it's a different dynamic, it's a different way of slicing the pie.
It absolutely is, yeah.
That's something that doesn't necessarily get reflected, because I've asked this question for many years, many years. Is how do we go as these kids move between the grades? Are we seeing that kind of a growth as well, instead of just looking at second grade from year to year to year to year?
So you're talking about the difference, so longitudinal, which is just the way the state does it, which is how'd second grade do last year and how'd second grade do this year, right? So that has its place, and what then you're contrasting it with sort of tracking a cohort of students.
Yes.
So the graduating class of 20 whatever, whatever year they start. We do both of that internally. So I think very typically, and we do the same thing publicly, the reporting from the state and also for our strategic plan typically is longitudinal, because it's easier to say, we're just going to benchmark third grade year over year, or fourth grade year over year. I will say, though, that our local growth model does factor that in, because the local growth model, remember, is statistically built on every individual student's prior performance. So it bakes it in, but we do, and actually Dr. George was just busy putting together the cohort trajectories. She's only starting them because we only have a couple years of data here, but for the PSAT. So the graduating class of 2021, how'd they do in 8th grade, how'd they do in 9th grade?
Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
So we absolutely look at that internally.
Okay.
Yep.
And then for the intervention chart, the kindergartens, you had like 85%. But numerically, what does that translate to?
So what that means, it's not that 85% of our kindergartners are receiving interventions.
No.
Yeah.
But when you
What
have a
number
chart,
of students?
Yeah, when you have a chart like that and you look at 50%, well, 50% of 4 is 2, 50% of 100 is 50. So are we looking at 100 kids that come in and 50% of those?
I
or are
can
we
get
looking
those
at
numbers
like
for you,
4?
because that's what this is built off of. I just
Yeah.
don't have it in the presentation, but I can absolutely share that. It's not 4, I'll tell you that.
No, and I
Yeah.
know it's the
Yeah.
truth is somewhere in the middle. It
Yeah,
always is.
absolutely.
But it's just a matter of, this is what statistics gives us, is you still have to look at the raw numbers to see,
Yeah.
okay, are we looking at a big problem here because we have many kids going in for the interventions, or yeah, we have 50%, but 50% of a very small number.
What I will tell you, and we have, like I said, I can picture in my head the tables that we use to build this. I just don't have the numbers memorized. What I will tell you is that there are not very many grade levels overall where we are outside of what we would typically assume to be our normal percentage of kids receiving interventions. So
Okay.
nationwide, it's, you have your 80% of kids don't need to receive interventions, then your 15 tier 2 and your 5 tier 3. So that's typical, and we're not that far from typical. Where we have specific areas that it deviates is where we focus. But I can get those numbers.
That's fine.
Yeah.
Thank you, everybody.
Okay, to close up, I want to thank the three of you for coming up. They did not know they were coming up, but I appreciate it, because it's important to get the building perspective. I just want to say that, while we're talking about where we can be better, I agree, like with what Mr. Idding said. I mean, I think our teachers have continually been working very hard, to continue to provide better and better literacy instruction. I think our classrooms do look different than they did years ago. And also people, from principals have been very directly involved, the district office, and I know Dr. Klote's been very involved. She's back there, right? Dr. Klote's back there. We have all of our curriculum directors are involved in different aspects of literacy too. So thank you, Dr. Schlichter, to you and your department. I think we're doing a lot of good work. I just want the board to know that we're never getting a complacent mode to where we can't be better. And I think that's the way we're continuing to look at literacy. And I would report to the three of you that since you've been standing up there, the Cubs have scored.
So.
So we're going to make you stay up. It's a good, yeah.
Yeah, don't
move. No, thank you.
All right, then we will move right along to number 6, Human Resources, Mr. Gentry.
Yes. One item on the agenda, 6.1, Human Resource Updates. Mr. Zier.
I just want to give a quick update on a couple of items that are bulleted here. The big one that we have going on right now, if you remember, the board a while back approved having Interactive Health accompanied with or partnered with Integra to come in and do health screenings for our employees. And we are in the middle of that. We're wrapping up our first week. A few of our schools experienced that this week, and we'll be wrapping that up next week. We have currently 433 of our employees that are going to participate in the health screenings over the next couple of weeks. That's out of the 777 who take the insurance. If you recall, we limited that to folks who are on the insurance plan, and we did not allow family members or other dependents to get involved. So about 55, 56% at this point. So for the first time around, we're fairly happy with the involvement that's taking place with the interactive health screenings. Those employees will also be able to, in 6 months, go back in and get another update on their screening free of charge. So we're holding these screenings on campus. Also, employees can sign up and go off campus at their convenience. So we actually have employees getting these screenings all over the suburbs and out west of us also, depending on where they're living. But most of them decided to do it on campus in their buildings. So very successful campaign with that moving forward. The second thing I want to highlight here, we are going to have a second open enrollment this year that is scheduled to begin November 6th through the 17th. If you recall, we are doing the second open enrollment so we can have all of our renewal dates be January 1. Renewal dates for different things and restart dates, whatever you want to call them, are kind of across the board right now. So we needed to hold this second open enrollment. So moving forward in the future, instead of having employees open enroll in August, they will be doing that in November. So we'll have a 2-week period here where they can go in and make any changes, and then they will not be able to make changes until November of 2018 unless they have a life event that occurs. Those are the big updates from Human Resources.
Yeah, I just want to thank you, Mr. Zier, but also Mr. Altmaier. Both have been very instrumental in the health screenings, and I think it's a really positive thing. And I think our turnout for the first round is very good, and I think it will only continue to increase in subsequent years. So I think they've both taken a lot of initiative with this, and it's going very well.
Great.
Thank you.
Any other questions? If not, we will pass it to policy.
Okay.
Mrs. Melinda.
Yeah, or Mr. Troy.
Well, she's listed as second fiddle, so I'll defer to. I'll pass my time to Mrs. Melindy.
Yes. In the press packet, you'll notice that there are multiple 5-year review updates. The majority of those have absolutely no changes, and there's one policy in there that does have a change. However, we don't even have that policy. So there's only 4 of all of those listed that we do have a slight change, very slight change that we're bringing to you this evening, and they are outlined on the front page of the recommendation for changes. Again, they're just policy cross-reference changes, a couple minor non-substantive changes, and some legal references. So I don't know if anybody has any questions over any of those 4, but there's nothing really substantial that is being changed in it.
Any questions?
No, I vote we comply with the laws.
Yeah.
That's what it turns out to be.
Found the radical guy on the board.
I don't don't sit on this committee, but I also support the
Let's make it quick. Get a ball game here. Okay, we have our payables, our purchase orders, accounts payable, impress checks, disbursements. Any questions, concerns about those? Nope. Okay, we'll move those forward to the board. Item 8.2, revenue and expenditures report. Mr. Altmaier.
Thank you very much. In front of you, actually at your table, you do have the August 2017 financial executive summary. In board book, currently, the August 2017 financial executive summary is also there, but as of yesterday, it was August of 2016. So board book online has been updated as of today, and you do have the hard copy. The second month into the fiscal year, not a lot to report. I think the biggest news is you'll notice that there's no state funding coming through, no state revenues coming through for the months of July and August. Obviously, that was because of the evidence-based formula being passed in September, for which in September the district did start to receive the base funding minimum amounts. So revenue is flowing to the state at a nice, healthy amount, by the way. So other than that, health insurance claims appear to be tracking consistently month over month, trending favorable 2 months into the year. That will change a little bit come September. Reported month end, simply because of the contractual changes that we did with the unions last year. Other than that, really nothing to report at this time, 2 months into the fiscal year. I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
I have no questions. Anybody else? No questions? All right. We're going to keep moving. Monthly fiscal updates, Mr. Altmaier.
The only thing to report in the monthly fiscal update is the audit is complete, and the auditors of Evans, Marshall, and Peace will be here next week to present the audit report, and at that time we will have a hard copy of the audit report as well as the online version for your review. The other item to note in the month of November, next month we will be presenting to the board the estimated EAVs from Kane County and McHenry County. We have currently received those, but as we normally do the month before the levy, we'll present where we think we stand from a new construction standpoint, as well as an estimated EAV and estimated tax rate for the community. So stay tuned on that. Just wanted to let you know that that was coming down the pipeline as well. And I'd be happy to answer any questions you have on that informational report.
Do you have any prediction or inside information on how the EAV is going to look compared to last year?
Only because I have not studied and analyzed it. I do have that information. I just don't have that right this evening, but I can share that with the board.
Anything further on that? Okay. Any questions on the activity funds report? Okay, we'll move to 8.4, the ADP National Account Renewal. Mr. Altmaier.
Thank you very much. We have been with ADP since 2008. The last time we redid the contract was in 2012, and we had a 5-year contract that time. And at that time, it's important to note that we relatively kept the overall fees to ADP flat. Well, the contract expired last month, and for the last several months, we've been working with ADP to renew that agreement. We currently use ADP not only for payroll services and tax filing services, but we use them for our enterprise HR management system as well as time card e-time system. So we spend a couple $100,000 a year with ADP, primarily as a result of the dollars spent for the HR management system as well as the time card time filing system. That being said, what we have in front of you is another 5-year renewal extension of that service. Within the memo, you'll note that up front we have a 3% overall reduction in the current payroll and e-time fees, approximating a savings of approximately $6,300 a year. Overall, the contract as presented in the memo that you have in front of you is relatively flat. In other words, ADP came to the table to say, hey, for the next 5 years, we'll keep your overall fees flat. They reduced overall fees, but in years 2, 3, and 4, they increased. They're asking for an increase of 2% of the overall fees. But at the end of the day, the overall contract amendment would be flat. Well, I continued to negotiate with ADP as I pulled together this memo, and the 3% is now 5% savings to the district, which is approximately a $10,000 annual savings to the district with this new amendment. So coming to the board next week, I will have a revised memo to present to the board, but the recommendation still remains the same, asking the board to approve this 5-year renewal, as we are currently very happy with the services that are being provided by ADP. I'd be happy to field any questions you may have on the memo.
From your, like, peer districts and stuff, do you have any sense of benchmark-wise, the kind of where this stands in relation to others?
You know, I don't. A lot of other districts do utilize payroll in-house, but what I can't benchmark is they all utilize different HR management systems, right? They utilize different time card systems. And those dollars approximate $140,000 of the $200,000 that we're currently spending with ADP. I certainly can do that, but generally, most districts don't utilize ADP for all of those services combined.
Okay.
A few districts do, but not that many.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, our long ago, we determined the software we used financially wasn't very good.
Correct.
Payroll-wise,
We
this
wouldn't-
was a much better cost-effective route.
Right.
Because you guys have been, we used to have issues many years ago, haven't had, right?
Right.
We don't have
Yeah,
a lot of
and there are districts out there that are paying, $500,000 a year to implement a new financial software system that can handle the HR management piece, that can handle the payroll piece. I think we're spending $5,000 a year, $6,000 a year for our current SDS system that does what we needed to do from a financial perspective. But certainly from an HR management perspective, that's why we went this route.
Sure. Is 5 years the right term? Should it be shorter, longer, or?
From a negotiation standpoint, we were able to maximize the amount coming back to the district with the 5-year versus a 3-year.
Okay.
So I opted to go with 5, knowing that where we are within HR and where we are within payroll, that seems reasonable.
Right, and you're not looking.
We're not
you're
looking
at
to
any
move.
financial software that
No.
would possibly take the place of this, so.
Correct.
Yeah, the only thing I'm looking for, and I didn't look at this ahead of time, is all the additional reporting that we have here in the last couple of years and how they're charging, because that was pretty expensive stuff, if I was remembering right. Did they mitigate that at all, or is it still pretty pricey as far as?
I think from a reporting standpoint, it's pricey, but then again, we only use the reporting on occasion. We don't receive consistent reporting from ADP.
Yeah, ACA stuff, yeah.
Oh, yeah, that's not part of this.
Okay, all right. They price that separately.
Yes.
Okay.
That's with a plan source. That's with a different
Okay.
vendor.
All right, any other further questions on this? I mean, you guys, how are you feeling about it? Feeling okay? Always. Compliant with the law, saving money, all that stuff's good stuff, right? Yeah, okay. Yep, all right. Okay, then we'll move that forward to the board for approval at our next meeting. Which brings us to 8.5, debt refunding opportunity. Mr. Altmeyer, and we have the fine.
We have guests, so yes.
Suited gentlemen in the audience.
Yes, I will ask them to
Help us through
step up
this.
to the podium. We do have a debt refunding opportunity to talk about here, to speak to the board about, as well as administration. Here to present that opportunity is Bob Lewis on the far left from PMA, and Eric Anderson, which everybody is familiar with Piper Jaffray, and also from Piper Jaffray. So these guys are going to throw around a lot of terms that you're very familiar with, bank qualification, the BQ benefit, negative defeasance, all your favorite words. I encourage you guys to find some new ones for this board. We're always looking for new ones.
We can quiz everybody afterwards.
I can speak those terms with automaticity.
Yes, so. Yeah, you want to throw that up there if you could do that? That would be great. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to our presenters here.
Great. Well, good evening, everybody. You may recall that we were here to discuss with you refundings a couple of years ago. We call those mini phase refundings. Back in 2013 was the big phased refunding that we agreed to at that time was a 5-year program. We'd come visit you again in 2018 to take care of the last chapter, if you will. And just to draw your attention, on page 3 of the presentation this evening, take a look at 2013, middle of the year. Those rates, whether you take a look at any one of the maturities and compare that to today's rates are all lower than they were in 2013. So by being patient and waiting that 5 years, the district, so far anyway, has been rewarded in waiting, and the opportunity to proceed with a refunding that removes essentially the wall of debt that's coming up is upon us now. One of the things we want to do is to remain very flexible, and so we've met with administration off and on for about the last year, and we've determined that a gradual pace is appropriate here. Bank qualified, as Mr. Altmaier mentioned, means that if the district were to issue less than $10 million in any one particular calendar year, you could enjoy a benefit versus, say, for example, a larger refunding. That benefit is in the form of lower interest rates. And though that's actually shown to you.
Lower interest rates and cost issuance too, right?
Lower interest rates, costs of issuance might be a little bit higher because of the nature of doing, say, 4 or 5 different transactions versus 1 or 2.
Okay.
But the benefit of the lower interest rate shown to you on page number 6 is significant, and especially in the years that we are looking at refunding bonds and then restructuring them.
And the BQ strategy also allows for more efficient escrows by shortening the length of the escrow,
right?
Like tackling that wall at different points in time.
Less negative arbitrage.
Yes.
So, so at this point, what I'd like to do, page 8 essentially gives you the goals of the board as were established back in 2013. If you look down to point number 3, the phase 2 refunding, which is what we're really talking about right now, is the original plan was early to late 2018, and we're right on that. We're probably just a little bit more, a couple of months ahead of that at this point. And the phase 3 refunding might actually turn into phases 3, 4, and 5. But the key is to remain flexible, and we've got that flexibility not only in 2017, but 2018 and the years thereafter. So I'll pass it over to Bob here to talk about the actual structure.
So as Eric alluded to, we're not up there yet. We're on slide 9. That shows you the graph and the aforementioned wall. And that wall doesn't have to be addressed all at one time. You can address it in different phases. And the reason for doing that, again, is what Eric already said, the bank qualification, but also those bonds that are within the wall are not callable. So the closer we do something to the wall, the more efficient your escrow performance is going to be. So graphically, you can see then how the plan is to take those bars and fill them in those 2 areas where you see those circles located. Slide 11, the restructuring analysis. We continue with the similar assumptions we had before, 3.5% annual B&I increases. Note your deadline to affect that wall is March 1st of 2020. So you don't have to do anything until then. It's just that we think for some reasons that we'll get into here in a moment that it may make financial sense for the board to consider it. One of the key drivers here is the market risk assessment. One of the reasons you would consider doing something now versus doing something later is interest rates could go up between now and 2020. But one of the things we know is that there's a natural hedge built into the plan in that the escrow gets shorter the closer you get to the wall. So things get a little more efficient the longer you wait. But the longer you wait, the more market risk you take. So none of us here can predict that what that risk is in terms of will rates go up or will they go down. But we can measure something called the break-even market movement. That's the amount interest rates can go up between now and that point in time. So you end up with the exact same result. And if you looked at doing the entire restructuring today versus doing the entire restructuring in 2020, rates could go up 35 basis points, or 1.35%. You end up with the exact same spot. So that seems like a fairly large break-even market movement. But again, it depends on your own risk aversion as a board. However, when you implement the bank qualification strategy, which gives you hopefully a better relative interest rate, plus it shortens the escrow period, because instead of tackling all 4 years of the wall, you begin by tackling that first year of the wall, leaving the subsequent years untouched in this next phase. Well, that break-even market movement decreases from 135 basis points all the way down to 65. So it gets into an area that becomes more tolerable from a risk-averse standpoint as far as what sort of market risk are you eliminating by doing something now versus waiting.
Can you briefly just elaborate on the escrow concept you're pointing to?
Sure.
I think I'm getting it, but if you can.
Yeah, if you, let me see if we have the slide in here, maybe an appendix. I can't remember. Yeah, if you look at slide 22, all the way in the back of the presentation, the appendix. Unlike home mortgages, in which you can refinance them at any time and pay off the old mortgage, walk out with your brand new mortgage, municipal bonds have a period of time in which they're not callable, or in some cases are not callable at all, which was common with capital appreciation bonds, which we know that you have some of those. So if you look at slide 22, we summarize at the bottom of each column which one of those bond series are indeed callable. And the series that have the most principal in the so-called wall are series 03, 03A, and 04. And you look at the bottom of the column, none of those are callable. So when you actually refund these, what you're doing is you're setting up an escrow to make a portion of those payments in the future at maturity. So you're not actually paying them off. You're setting aside funds to say, when we get to that year, we're going to pay X amount from the levy.
Now with tax money, right. Now
with
with
tax levy.
You're borrowing money to put it away to pay the debt off.
Right.
You're guaranteeing that it'll be paid.
Right. And then that escrow, the longer that escrow is, the more inefficient it is, because you think about you're going to borrow at a rate here and you're going to invest at a rate down here.
Right.
So if you shorten that period of time, it's going to bring down the inefficiency. So if you look at the fourth year of the wall, that's going to be a longer escrow versus, okay.
Gotcha.
Does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay. So slide 12 gives you the detail, which we don't need to really dwell on this slide a whole lot. You can see the orange boxes are the payments that are impacted. Those are showing you as they are reduced. Then you're seeing the blue bars. Those represent the debt service for the proposed restructuring bonds, 1 in 17, 1 in 18. Both of them are roughly $10 million at that bank qualified capacity. Now, 17 you need to do before the end of this fiscal or this calendar year. But 18, you have that whole year to make that decision. You don't have to, we contemplate this as early as February, but you could literally wait all the way to the end of the year. So graphically, slide 13 shows you what's taken place then. The gray area in the back represents your current debt service as it's structured. The blue bars represent your existing debt service after the proposed restructuring. And the orange represents what's added as a result of restructuring. So actually, when you do a restructuring, you're adding a little bit of debt service each year because you have interest payments on those new refunding bonds. It's another benefit of doing it in smaller chunks is it makes those incremental interest payments smaller by each year. And you see at the back end is where we start filling in the orange. Now you still have that hole there in the middle, and that is a good strategy that the district employed all those years ago is it manages your interest rate risk. Longer bonds have more risks than shorter bonds. So if you fill in the back half now, if interest rates do happen to go up over the next couple of years, you have that hole in the center that you can fill in, and those bonds wouldn't be outstanding as long. So it helps mitigate any market risk that rates would go up between now and any future phases. Now that green line is an important line because that represents the 3.5% growth target in the levy that you implemented. And if you continue to follow that target, you can see over below it. And eventually, upon completion of all the phases, you could fill that in. But what's nice and another beauty of this plan is it allows the board at a future date to consider adjusting that target. Because as long as we stay below that green line, you could decide at some point, hey, we want that target to stop growing at 3.5% when we get to 25 and then flatten it out. Or maybe we want to drop it that year. The good news is you don't have to make that decision in 2017 or 2018 because we're staying below the green line. But like in 19 or 20, that's when you can say, hey, should we revisit the goal? What has happened at the state? What has happened to our EAV? You can react to more information. So slide 14 just shows you what it would be upon completion of the plan if you kept it at 3.5%. So this would be post all phases. If you see slide 15, you have 17, 18, 19, 20, and 21. Again, we're trying to target doing each one of them as a BQ financing. Now you could get to 2019 and decide, you know what, we're getting short enough now, the escrow's short enough, let's just knock out the whole thing. So you're not committing to a 19, 20, and 21 financing. The only thing you're potentially committing to right now is a 2017 financing and conceptually an 18 financing, but all that's subject to change based off more information as it comes out. So slide 16 gets into a timeline. Should you decide to take advantage of the bank qualification, we have set it up so that you can do something before the end of this calendar year, but also get into the market hopefully before you see the mad rush at mid-November or afterwards, because everybody's sort of thinking about, hey, should we do a BQ deal? So the goal would be to try to have you pass a resolution by November 9th so that you could be into the market shortly after that date before the Thanksgiving holiday, which sometimes the market's a little unpredictable after that time. But it also gets you hopefully in advance of the mad rush, if you choose to proceed. The board ultimately has to discuss and decide, is 65 basis point break-even market movement, is that the type of risk that we want to eliminate for now? Because if rates stay the same, you're better off to wait in 2020. Rates go up 65 basis points, you're indifferent. Rates go up 100 basis points, you might have been better off doing something.
Between now and 20, you're saying,
Right.
is the...
Right.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
And then the concept where magnitude-wise, you'd be kind of capped at 10% to get the BQ status.
Yeah, 10 million, right.
10 million,
Which is,
yeah.
this is why this time, it's really a good idea at this time you have these discussions, because you haven't done a tax-exempt borrowing this year. And then it's December 31st, that 10 million for 17 goes away.
Right.
And then 18, if you did 10 million right in February of 18, well, then you have locked yourself for the next 10 months. That's why it may, for a couple reasons, it may make sense to not do it immediately at the beginning of 18. One, so you don't handcuff yourself in case later on you decide to do more or you have something else you need to do. Plus, when you get to slide 17, you'll see that there's another refunding opportunity for the 2010 bonds. This is a savings refunding opportunity, and these bonds are callable. So Piper and PMA have gone back and forth quite a bit on what's the best strategy for utilizing this call, and ultimately we settled upon it's best to just refund those for savings, where you can put them back in the same footprint, and we estimate that you would save about $583,000 on a present value basis. Now you're probably scratching your head and say, well, yeah, but if we do the $10 million restructuring and we do the $6 million refunding, that's $16 million. You just told us we can't go over $10 million. Well, another benefit of waiting towards the end of the year is when you get within 90 days of that call date, which would be October 1st, roughly, of 18, this would be considered a current refunding in our tax law, and current refundings under tax law don't count against your bank qualified cap for that year. So you can end up doing $16 million in one calendar year bank qualified. Right. And by waiting to do a second piece of restructuring at the same time as this, you economize on some of those costs of issuance Tony was talking about by doing a single financing. Although it'd be sold as two bond issues 15 days apart, you economize on a lot of cost of issuance because you're doing it contemporaneously.
Mm-hmm.
So
what is the logic behind the 10 million? Like, why? It's just kind of the way it
threshold?
is, but it's
another name for bank qualification, a more sophisticated technical name is called a small issuer exemption. Yeah. And it's with the IRS and, well, Congress passed the law, but the IRS in implementing it, it's meant to benefit smaller issuers, to give them even lower interest rates by giving banks another tax break. So it's targeted towards local units of government and not towards the city of Chicago or state of Illinois to to give you an additional boost of tax exemption, if you will.
Okay.
It was
I'll
established
take
in
it.
1986, and that at the $10 million value and hasn't changed since.
Okay.
So.
So it follows logical pattern then, right?
Well, so I'm following. And that means also then you could get a more favorable rate that otherwise is not available for the smaller units of government?
Yeah, if you flip the page, yeah, and Eric probably wants to address this more, it's page 6.
Page 6. Yeah, so page 6 discusses the estimated bank qualified or BQ benefit. Notice in the early years, down below is the year of maturity. So year 1 would be, say, next year this time. Year 20 would be out into 2037. Notice that in the first 7 years, there is no benefit. But once you start to get out to years 8 and thereafter, that benefit does widen out. And that provides a lower cost of capital for the district when it issues those particular bonds. Doesn't look like much, but when you apply the dollars that are associated with it for the term that those are going to be outstanding, it does really significantly reduce the value. And in the aggregate, as Bob has mentioned a few different times, by doing all of this now, or waiting and doing them and assuming an unchanged world, you've got about, at 135 basis points, is about $6 million of interest. So that's a significant value on which to consider, certainly, and from our standpoint, watch and advise the district in terms of when do you access the market. So the flexibility, 17, we would advise you take advantage of that. 18, you've got the ability to step into a $10 million plus the 6, so $16 million. And then, but if you wait a little bit, we may find that rates have plunged. Suddenly it makes sense to do the whole thing. But again, you've retained that flexibility. You may choose to enact that in 19 or even in 20. So the program has a lot of flexibilities for you. We've discussed some other things that at this point we're not quite exactly prepared to discuss with the board, but additional ways to save even further dollars and provide for future flexibility beyond this particular issue that's coming up.
Any other questions? I mean, what do you think about peeling this off like this as opposed to just waiting and having to do it as a larger chunk? I mean, you're just faced with that uncertainty that this kind of eliminates. The way I look at it is it just eliminates some of that market risk.
Yeah, when I think of 65 basis points between now and 2020, it feels like a safe bet to take it now.
Yeah, well,
I guess from a cost, like an issuance cost standpoint, what does that look like to do a $10 million now? What does that cost?
The cost for a $10 million bond issue is probably going to be around 1.5% of the bond size, so maybe probably $150,000.
Okay.
And if you do a larger bond issue, that percent starts coming down. You start to get closer to 1%. So incrementally, if you add up the 5, those would probably be, 25% higher than if you did just one single issue. But you make up for the additional costs through the improved escrow efficiency and the hopefully relatively lower interest rates on the bank qualification.
Right.
Right, and it's factored into your 0.65%. All those
Yes.
bits all cost into their analysis of what your interest rate risk is.
The
Here.
costs are factored into the
Yeah.
65?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, the escrow assumptions on the escrows, all that stuff is all factored into all this.
Okay.
So, yeah, it's not like you have that plus the cost of issuance.
Right, that's what I was
Yeah,
thinking through, yeah.
So, Mark, you have any thoughts?
We've been meeting with, Eric Anderson and Bob for quite some time regarding our overall debt structure and this opportunity. So, I bring it here before the board with the recommendation to follow the scheduled timeline on page 16. So what I'm looking for today is guidance to continue along this path, to go ahead and do a refunding, the $10 million bank qualification this year, and then looking at next year to maybe possibly, depending upon where interest rates go, maximize, do another one maybe later in the year, depending upon where rates go throughout the year.
And just kind of tactical question is, we may have already said this if I didn't catch it, but taking the 10 million off the maturity of what and pushing it to what? Like year-wise.
That would be page.
You see that, the graph on
13,
page
right?
13?
It's the front end.
Yep.
So you're taking it from 19 and 20. The one you would do in 17, you're taking it from 19 mostly, a little bit of 20, and it's going out some to 27.
I got you.
And then 32 and 33.
Yeah. I wasn't catching the gray part first, but now I see it.
Okay, I mean, any other,
So it's not action to say, keep going, keep looking into this, right? Is that?
I think the thought process was, because they had kind of given me a timeline, and I said, we went through this a little bit before with our last issuance, and the timeline that it took us to start talking about it and make a decision was at least 3 months, maybe 4.
Mm-hmm.
And during that time, we did get pinched a little on what had transpired, and where the rates were at the time, and by the time we settled and all that. And so I actually tell them, I said, now I'd really like you to bring it to this committee of the whole meeting here in October, and I'd like us to, again, because the timeline for this type of stuff takes a little bit of time, and I don't know that I want to just keep rehashing. I want if this is the right strategy, rates are right, they could go down, they could go up, but it's the right strategy. Let's just act and do it. Is kind of my attitude on this. Is the situation seems right if philosophically we agree with this is a good way to approach it right now. I'm ready to go personally.
Correct.
I'm ready to go.
Yeah, just kind of looking at this again in that same picture, it almost feels like there isn't that much opportunity in waiting. I can't envision what would happen to make it that much more advantageous down the road.
Rates can always, but then it's another opportunity later, and you haven't
Right.
after the first of the year, we can turn around and do another 10.
Right
After the first of the year. So, if they do, you can act quickly on that too. So that's what I'm like, let's not wait. Probably should just bring this to the board and try and move forward. I don't think we have, again, the other issue was the way our board meetings, I think, are structured in November, right?
Correct.
We only got one, in fact.
We only have one,
one.
which would be the
So
one
that
to
was
adopt
the other
the
part of my
resolution.
thought process is of let's not get caught with that. Let's just go ahead and move this forward to the board meeting here in another week, and then let's go. Right, we meet. Yeah. So,
All right.
are you guys on board with that?
I agree.
Okay. Mark, are you just?
Yeah, on board.
Okay. So that's what I think we should do. We should move this forward to the board for approval on next board meeting. So, okay. Anything further you guys want to add to the party here? No. You're happy to get a transaction going, but
Thank you.
Any new terminology to throw out there?
No, well, Mark had one at the beginning. It was
Negative defeasance.
Negative defeasance.
Oh, we covered that before.
Yeah. Inefficiency.
We're all over that phrase.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
all right.
Okay,
I'm done with mine. Yeah.
we're all done, then on to number 9, Building and Grounds, Mr. Troy.
Okay, 9.1, O&M updates. Mr. Rankosik, anything to highlight on the O&M updates?
Point out to you our earnings for the third quarter and our demand load response partnership with Internoc. There's an attached document clarifying that for you. That does oscillate from year to year in our partnership based on what the PJM auction is. Sometimes it's been 3 times as much in some particular years, but this is where we are this year. Working very hard in the O&M department, closing out FY17 major projects, and at the same time working on the design of the FY18 major projects right now. So more to come on that. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Okay, any questions on the report? Nope. Okay, hearing no questions, move on to 9.2, construction updates for the high school. Anything to highlight on this side?
I think we have the fence around the tennis courts completed, not temporary anymore. So
Okay.
that project is basically done. I've seen draft reviews of pay requests, a trade contractor pay request, which would be the last one for the entire project. There would yet to be a draw placed in by LAMP after some record documents are processed, transmitted through over how comprehensive records on the project. But we are on the verge of completion.
Great. Okay, any questions on that topic? All right, we'll keep moving along here. 9.3, preventive maintenance agreement. Seemed pretty self-explanatory to me. Anything to highlight on this one?
No, happy to answer questions.
Okay, any questions from the committee or the board? Any opposition to moving this forward then? Okay, so we'll move that one forward. 9.4, engineering agreement for Reed Road campus pavement.
This is one of the major projects that was on the presentation to the board in September, and we need HR Green's assistance. We are presently doing hourly services with the traffic engineer to come to a reasonable design that we will give to HR Green to begin the process, and it will be a little more complex than usual because we'll have to have a village review with the Lake in the Hills and get their review and approval and stormwater management calculation transmittals, which we have done with Huntley before, but now with Lake in the Hills, it'll be a new adventure.
Okay. Any questions from the committee or the board? Any opposition to moving this forward then? All right, we'll move that one ahead. 9.5, the power circuits in the West Labs at the high school.
I'm very happy to say that this came in well under anticipated budget. There was some maneuvers at the last minute after we got some preliminary estimates from the contractor who actually built the West Addition for us, the electrical contractor, where the high school team realized that they could operate very effectively with some repurposing of existing electrical conduits and rewiring separate circuits. So we just have to install a transformer in the wing down there, the new West Lab, a couple electrical distribution panels, one on each floor, and re-pull some circuits and actually try to fish through the walls a couple more circuits, and we'll meet the needs of the science program delivery as it sits right now.
And what would be the timeline for getting this work completed?
In our bid specifications, there was language in there after discussion with the high school administration that as long as the contractors' workers are background checked, they could work in the electrical rooms that are not classrooms. There's a storage room on the second floor that has a substantial amount of the work, one of the electrical panels and the transformer to be set, and a common room for teachers and storage between two of the labs on the first floor. That work in preparation for winter break could be done in advance, and then over winter break, work in the classrooms would be done, and the project would be completed by the end of winter break.
Okay. All right, any questions from the board or the committee?
Glad that came in lower than expected.
Yep, agreed. Okay, any opposition to moving this forward? All right, we will go ahead and move that forward. That closes out building and grounds. Mr. Fleck, legislative.
Okay. First item, 10.1, is the IASB Delegate Assembly. We have, we do this every year, of course. We have some resolutions. Ms. Melendi, I don't think you've done this before, but we'll go through these resolutions and we get everybody's opinion on if we want to support or oppose the resolution. So we poll all the board members, and if there's consensus, strong consensus on any of the resolutions, we move those forwards. If there's ones that are kind of close, then we'll talk about them and eventually decide how we want our delegate to to go with that. So these are out. Please look at them and try and get your information in so we can have it before the next board meeting.
We will, as a stock, what we do is we'll create a spreadsheet we'll send to the board where they will indicate whether they support or don't support each one. So we'll work on that. So you'll get a spreadsheet from us, and that way, as you remember, if you all agree on it, then there's no really reason to talk about it. And I believe the intent is to do that at the November action board meeting, right? Is when we would actually vote on them. Is that right, Mr. Fleck?
Yes. So,
Okay.
so actually, we have 2 more meetings to go with this,
Right.
but we'll talk about it at the next meeting. We'll take, will we talk about it at the next meeting?
No.
Okay,
No,
so never
we-
mind.
Just get everything in.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's a reason to do it before the November meeting. You just need to know, the delegate needs to know when they go to the session, how to vote. So I think it's the November action meeting would be
Okay,
would
so
be
we'll-
fine.
we'll-
So it
maybe
gives you
we'll have
plenty
a-
of time to read through them.
We'll have a reminder at the next meeting to make sure you get it done, and we'll have a deadline date that
And then we
everybody
need
can
a
get.
delegate.
And then we need a delegate. So we'll do that at the next meeting, or on that meeting also at the November meeting.
It could be done. It could be done then, yeah. So I guess if anybody wants to, you've done it, Paul,
I've
right?
done it,
You've
yeah.
done it, I think
I
Don's
can-
done
I
it.
could do it.
I mean, if
It
you want to.
doesn't matter.
I think you could.
As the vice president, you can go. Oh, it's a blast.
Okay, well.
Everybody should do it once.
My sarcasm radar is low. So, okay, we'll talk. All right, next item, legislative updates, 10.1.1. Really, there was just a list of education bills that were signed into law. I kind of went through them. There wasn't anything super exciting, in my opinion. I did note that the governor vetoed the requirement that all schools include a unit of instruction for writing cursive. So we'll see how that goes if it passes, it survives the veto.
This is what they have to worry about.
Yeah, I guess. So, well, it's nice. It's nice that that's the legislative report instead of we don't have a budget. So, I will take it. And that is it. Item number 11. You have the minutes in the packet. If anybody has any comments, please let us know. Otherwise, we'll move that forward for the meeting for approval. Any comments on the minutes? Okay. Good. And we've already removed 2 items from the agenda. So with that, at 8:12, I will make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
And a second for Mr. Troy. All those in favor?
Hi.
Aye. Opposed? Okay. And then we are adjourned.
All right. Do you need this from me? Okay. I didn't